Advanced Financial Modeling, Topic 24, Global Investing. Section 5, compute the return and volatility improvements going from a purely domestic portfolio to a globally optimal portfolio. So we're going to start off with 4 asset classes. We're going to have cash, maybe like a money market account, an S&P 500 domestic stock portfolio, a foreign market, developed market portfolio, we'll call it an EFA, Europe, Australia, Far East, and an EMA, emerging market portfolio. So these two are foreign markets. We got cash and domestic portfolio. So say initially you're invested 100% in US stocks. That portfolio is going to give you a 7% return and a 15% volatility. And assume these are the correlations across those asset classes. So let's set up our spreadsheet to be able to calculate the portfolio's mean and standard deviation. And what we're going to do is we're going to have a formula in here. It's going to be a sum product of the means and the weights. And this one's always the tough one, the portfolio volatility. Now, in earlier lectures, I've written this as WTSW to the 1/2 power. So it's a matrix multiplication of the transpose of weights times the covariance matrix times the weights. Again, this is assuming the weights are in a column vector. And take that to the 1/2 power, you get portfolio standard deviation. However, I'm going to show you another shortcut. What if I don't put in S here? And I showed you the other shortcut that the covariance matrix S is really equal to the volatilities, a transpose of the volatilities, times a volatility vector times a correlation matrix. So I can combine these two shortcuts into one. Remember, these are not matrix multiplication. This is just a multiplication of arrays in Excel. And you can look at an earlier lecture to see how I did this. This is a matrix multiplication. So here's my formula. M-mult transpose W, where W are these weights, times, this is the covariance matrix, vols times transpose vols times the correlation matrix times W to the 1/2 power. So we'll go to the spreadsheet, take a look at that formula. So again, there's my sum product for portfolio mean. There's my M-mult transpose W, SW to the 1/2 power, where S, the covariance matrix, is vols times transpose vols times correl. And there's the sum of my weights. So let's say initially we had 100% invested in US equity. And there's my portfolio mean and standard deviation. So let's figure out how, if you're invested in stocks for 40 years of your life, putting in $12,000 a year, let's see how much money you would have. I'm going to do an FV function, future value. I'm going to put in a rate of 7% US rate for 40 years, and I'm going to put in $12,000 a year for 40 years. I'll have $2.395 million. All right, so let's talk about moving from a domestic portfolio to a globally optimal portfolio. We're going to do two ones. First of all, let's find the first global optimal portfolio is we're going to change these weights to find the best 7% return portfolio. And what I'm going to try to do is find a portfolio that has the same expected return as the S&P 500. And then we'll try to minimize vol, and let's try to see what that portfolio looks like. So I'm going to go here. I'm going to go data. Solver. And I want to find the best 7% portfolio. So what I want to do is I want to minimize portfolio volatility by changing these 4 weights. The expected return, I'm going to change this formula here. The expected return of that portfolio is equal to 7%. I'm trying to find the best 7% portfolio. So let's take a look at this. I want to minimize vol by changing the weights. The expected portfolio return is 7, and the sum of the weights is equal to 1. And I'm going to leave this box checked. I don't want any short sales. And it looks like the best I can do is this portfolio here, which gives me a 1348 volatility. So I can pick up an extra 1348. I can pick up an extra 152 basis points, or reduction in volatility, moving from just a purely domestic portfolio to a portfolio with the same return but lower volatility. But let's think about it in a different way. What if I want a portfolio that has the same risk as the S&P 500 but allows me to globally optimize? And let's figure out how much return improvement I pick up. So I'll just go back to Solver. In this case, I want to maximize portfolio return. and I want to have a constraint that the vol is equal to the S&P's vol, the domestic vol. Solve that, and looks like I have this portfolio here, and looks like I can get 758 based on these assumptions. So I'll put that in there, 7.58% return, which is an extra 58 basis points over just the domestic portfolio. So I can pick up 58 basis points of return improvement. And notice I'll do my FV function using 758 instead of 7. And looks like that little 58 basis points pickup, about 0.5% a year, means that when you retire, you have almost an extra $400,000. So this is what we mean, talk about the advantages of the diversification benefits of being able to invest internationally. Going back to an earlier topic, we can also see what this means. Looking at a domestic portfolio, this is our retirement model that we built in an earlier topic. And what if that retirement model was only constrained myself to using U.S. stocks and bonds, and I'm using that the portfolio that gets safer over time, using those weights I've given you. So if you're just in a domestic portfolio, you could see that the expected portfolio value, based on these assumptions here, the expected portfolio value is expected to be $2.6 million. You run a simulation, and what you find is, based on these assumptions of 15% savings, that you have a 73.7% chance of having enough money based on those assumptions. And you can see your 5% worst case and 5% best case. Now, what if I change the weights to allow both domestic and foreign stocks? What happens to that portfolio? Well, the portfolio value increases from 2.6 million to 2.7 million, and I've increased my probability of having enough money from 73 to 76%. So you can see, just by allowing yourself to invest in these foreign stocks in this very simple model, I can increase the expected value and lower my risk of not having enough money. Last thing I want to do is give you last advice, since this is my last topic, last slide of the semester: how to never worry about money. 4 points. Save 15% of every paycheck for retirement. Now that 15% includes company match, so maybe if you're lucky enough the company matches, say, the first 5% of savings, maybe you only need to put in 10 and the company puts in 5. So you need to save 15% of every paycheck, your 15% of your salary. No excuses, never change it unless you lose your job. Okay, that's number one. Number two, where do I put the money? A low fee target date fund. So think about target date funds. So target date funds usually have something like a date in their title, like a Vanguard or a Fidelity 2060 fund. And what you want to do is try to estimate, say, what year will you be age, say, 60 or 65 years old. And when you do that, say you're going to be 65 years old and you're 2060. So what you would try to find is the lowest fee 2060 fund. What that fund is going to roughly do is be mostly stock as you're young, and as you get older it gets a little more bonds and cash, and so it's going to reduce your risk over time. And what you want to do is find the lowest fee. So it's probably going to be something like a Vanguard 2060 fund or a Fidelity 2060 fund. So that's the first two things, most important. 15% of every paycheck, never stop it, no excuses, and put it in a target date fund. You get automatic rebalancing. You never have to look at the portfolio. You just wake up 40 years older later and realize you are set for retirement. Number three, accumulate 6 months of your living expenses in a money market account just in case you lose your income. So I know if this is your first job, that's really hard to do. So maybe your goal is over the next 2 years, I'm going to try to get that. So say your starting salary is, say, $50,000. However, your living expenses are maybe $2,000 a month. So maybe, so basic living, so that's just kind of, housing and food is $2,000 a month. So your goal is to have, say, 6 months, 2 times 6, $12,000, and have that in a savings account or money market account ready for you to live and find that next job. And then later, hopefully you don't have to worry about, well, I shouldn't say hopefully, but you may not have to worry about this for a little while, is if you have a child, you want to buy a term life insurance policy equal to 10 times your salary. So say, at some age you're making $100,000 a year and you have a child and you're worried about their future, or if your income stops for some reason, maybe your death. So you would have 10 times your salary. If your salary is 100, you have $1 million policy. And then immediately on the child's birth, start a 529. It's a plan in which there's some savings, tax savings related to it. So open up a 529 plan in your child's name and in your name. The nice part about 529 plans is you could switch it to different children or even other relatives, and the money is also in your name. So, and I've done some little bit of estimation. Basically, if based on current rates, I'd say you want to save about $5,500 a year for 18 years to have enough money to maybe pay for Penn State for your future little Penn Stater. So that's my little pitch for you. The 4 things never to forget. Well, at least the 3. You can look this one up later. 15% of every salary saved. Go in a target date fund. You never have to worry about the money, and try to build up 6 months of living expenses and account just in case you lose your income.